Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone smile at a dinner table and known, bone deep, that the smile was an invoice? That every kind word had a number attached, and one day the bill would come due? Tonight's story is about a man who paid that bill for 3 years without knowing it, and about the morning he found the receipt. It starts with a crab boat coming home early, an empty house on Thanksgiving, and a 9-year-old girl asleep in a freezing garage under moving blankets. It ends in Aspen, at a dinner table full of people who thought money could buy them a clean past. Along the way, you're going to learn something real about how con artists actually work. They don't pick locks. They get invited in. They marry in. And the thing that beats them is never rage. It's paperwork, patience, and a man who knows how to wait out a storm, because waiting out storms is literally his job. So pour something warm, because this one gets cold before it gets warm again. This is the story of Ezra Rafferty, and the note that cost a family everything they had. Let's get into it. The Bering Sea does not care what you deserve. Ezra Rafferty learned that at 19, the first winter he worked the rail of his father's boat, and he had spent 22 years since then making peace with it. He was 41 now, captain and co-owner of Rafferty & Sons Fisheries out of Corliss Bay, Washington, a 2-boat operation he ran with his younger brother Judd. His boat was called the Marnie Jean, and every man who worked her deck knew better than to ask about the name more than once. Marnie was Ezra's first wife. She had died of an aggressive lymphoma when their daughter Ivy was 4 years old, and she had died the way she lived, holding Ezra's hand and giving him instructions. Take care of our girl, don't get hard, marry someone kind if you marry at all. He had managed 2 of the 3. The king crab season ended early that year. The quota came fast, the weather broke right, and Ezra made a decision that would save his daughter's life, although he didn't know it yet. Instead of holding in Dutch Harbor for repairs, he pushed the Marnie Jean home 4 days ahead of schedule, because it was Thanksgiving, and because he had promised Ivy, Pinky promised over a satellite call that cost $11 a minute, that this year he would be at the table. The drive from the dock still smelled like diesel and salt. He stopped at a market and bought flowers for his wife Meredith, and a pumpkin pie, because Ivy liked the way the whipped cream hissed out of the can. The house he pulled up to was a beautiful house. Meredith had picked it. Meredith had picked most things for the past 3 years, and Ezra, who spent 5 months a year at sea, had let her, because a man who is gone half the year learns to stop arguing about curtains. The windows were dark, the driveway was empty. On the kitchen island, under a salt shaker, there was a note, and what it said, we will get to. But first Ezra heard the sound, a small cough, from the garage. He opened the door to the coldest room in the house and saw his daughter, 9 years old, asleep on a camping cot between the recycling bins, wrapped in the moving blankets they used to pad furniture, with a dead space heater beside her, and her breath showing in the air. He did not wake her at first. He stood there and counted, the way he counted in a wheelhouse when the waves came over the bow, because a captain who panics kills his crew. Then he picked her up, blankets and all, carried her to the living room, wrapped her in the comforter off his own bed, and turned the thermostat as high as it would go. Only then did he read the note. It was written on Maxine Copeland's cream-colored stationery, in Maxine Copeland's looping finishing school hand. His mother-in-law. We flew everyone to Aspen for the holiday. She's not our blood, she's baggage. Deal with her. 11 words about a child. Ivy stirred and rubbed her eyes, and when she saw him she did not cry, which broke his heart worse than crying would have. She just said, "Dad, you're early," in a voice that meant she had learned not to expect anyone. Over hot chocolate she told him the shape of it. Mom had left Tuesday with suitcases. She'd said a babysitter named Miss Carroll was coming. Nobody came. Wednesday night, Ivy's key wouldn't work in the front door, because the smart lock had been reset from someone's phone, and the only door that still opened with the old metal key was the garage. She was 9, and she was resourceful, and she was ashamed of none of it, and Ezra decided right then that whatever happened next, she would never learn to expect this little again. Then Ivy did something that changed 6 people's lives. She went to her backpack and came back with a phone Ezra had never seen, a cheap black phone and a green folder, and she said the sentence he would hear in his head for the rest of his life. "Dad, Mom doesn't know I found this in her bag. See this?" She had found it 2 weeks ago looking for gum. She had taken it Tuesday, on instinct, when she saw her own name on one of the pages inside. The line she had seen, typed in a lawyer's clean font, read, "The baggage problem resolves itself once custody is formalized." Ezra opened the folder, and Ezra smiled. It was not a warm smile. Men who had worked the rail with him in 40-foot seas had seen that smile exactly twice, and both times, something that thought it was stronger than him had ended up broken on a deck. Understand what was in that folder, because it matters. There was a divorce petition, signed by Meredith, dated blank, waiting like a loaded gun in a drawer. There was a custody memo describing Ezra as an absent father, 5 months at sea, unfit for primary care, with Ivy's future neatly assigned to boarding placement paid from her trust. And there were wire confirmations, 4 of them. $1.9 million, moved out of the Rafferty & Sons fleet expansion account in September, in tidy slices, into something called Alpengold Holdings LLC. Ezra knew that money the way you know your own hands. It was the engine fund, the new boat fund, 20 years of ice and broken fingers. He had never authorized a dime of it to move. The burner phone filled in the rest. It unlocked with Meredith's usual code, her mother's birthday, because arrogance is always lazy. On it were 4 years of messages between his wife and a man named Callan Rook, the Copeland family's attorney, a man who had stood at Ezra's own wedding and toasted the couple. 4 years. The affair predated the marriage, and buried in those messages was the real architecture of Ezra's life, laid out like a blueprint. The Copelands, Sterling and Maxine, Aspen developers with a 100-year-old name, were broken the way only rich people can be broke, leveraged past their eyelids on a mountain lodge project called Larkspur Ridge. They needed a bridge. They needed quiet money that asked no questions, and Rook had found them some. "There's a widower up in Corliss Bay," one early message read. "Crab money. Lonely. Meredith could land him in a season." She had. The gala where Ezra met Meredith, the one Rook had invited him to, calling it a maritime industry mixer, had been a casting call, and Ezra had been the only name on the list. 3 years of marriage, a performance with a budget. He sat in his warming house with his daughter asleep on the couch, and he read all of it twice, and he did not throw anything, and he did not drive to the airport. Because here is the thing about Ezra Rafferty that the Copelands never learned. You cannot make a storm come sooner by shouting at the sea, but if you know exactly when the storm is coming, you can arrange for your enemies to be standing in it. He looked at the last message on the phone, sent 2 days earlier from Aspen. "Closing dinner with Bancroft, Sunday. Monday we sign, the bridge clears, and we deal with the fish money problem in January. Sunday, he had 3 days. Friday morning, before the banks opened, Ezra made 3 calls from the wheelhouse of the docked Marnie Jean, because it was the only place he trusted. The first was to Judd, who arrived in 11 minutes and read the folder in silence, and whose only comment was to crack 4 knuckles, one at a time. The second was to Petra Osgood, the fisheries attorney who had papered every boat and permit the family owned for 15 years, a small gray-haired woman with the bedside manner of a harpoon. The third was to a forensic accountant Petra swore by, who by noon had done something beautiful. He had followed the wires. The $1.9 million had landed in Alpengold Holdings, and Alpengold, it turned out, was the quiet partner plugging the equity hole in Larkspur Ridge, which meant the Copeland's books, the immaculate books they were about to show a buyer, had stolen money baked into the crust. And the buyer. Ezra knew the name from the messages. Odell Bancroft, self-made freight and logistics, the kind of billionaire who still drove his first truck to the office once a year. A man famous, in the handful of profiles written about him, for 2 things. He did every deal on a handshake at a dinner, and he had walked away from 9 figures more than once over a single lie. The Copelands weren't selling him a lodge. They were selling him a family, a name, 100 years of clean Colorado pedigree. Ezra read those profiles in the wheelhouse and felt the plan click together like a hatch ceiling. He would not call the police first. Petra was blunt about why. A fraud report filed Friday becomes a detective's Tuesday. The wedding, the theft, the folder, all of it becomes a he said, she said, dragged out over 18 months while the Copeland's lawyers, meaning Rook, bury it. No. First you freeze the money before it can run. Then you kill the deal that the money was stolen for. In person, in public, where no lawyer can spin it. Then, and only then, you hand what's left to the government, gift-wrapped. Petra filed the emergency motions that afternoon, quietly, ex parte, in front of a judge who had known 3 generations of Rafferty boats. And when Meredith called that evening, cooing, asking how his crossing had been, saying she was so sorry about the mix-up with the sitter, that mother had sworn Miss Carroll was confirmed, Ezra looked at his daughter doing homework at the kitchen table, in a house warm as bread, and said, in a voice like calm water, "Don't give it another thought, sweetheart. We're having a quiet weekend. See you Monday." Saturday brought 2 things Ezra had not planned for, and one of them made everything worse in the best possible way. The first was a phone call from a stranger. The forensic accountant's subpoena prep had rattled a cage somewhere, and a man named Roscoe Meade got Ezra's number through Petra. Roscoe was 70, a former orchard owner from Palisade, and 11 years ago he had been a Copeland-in-law too. His daughter had married Percy Copeland, Meredith's brother. Roscoe told a story with old, dry grief in it. The engineered introduction, the warm 2 years, the signature that turned out to be on more documents than he remembered signing. He had lost the orchard, 400 acres, and it was a Copeland subdivision now called Meade Orchard Estates, which he said was the part that still kept him up, that they'd had the manners to name it after what they killed. "You're not the first, son," Roscoe said. "You're just the first one who caught it while the money was still moving." The second thing was a text from the burner phone, which Ezra had kept alive and silent. It was Rook, to Meredith, and it said, "Percy says a man matching the brother's description was asking questions at the airfield. Tell me the fisherman is on his boat." Judd had been spotted. The clock, which had been Ezra's friend, was now his enemy. Meredith called 4 times that evening. Ezra let it ring 3 times, then answered the 4th like a man half asleep in front of a football game. Behind her voice he could hear the party in Aspen, the bright glass sounds of people spending money they didn't have. She tested him gently, asked what he'd done all day. "Fix the space heater in the garage," he said. There was a pause you could have landed a plane on. Sunday morning, Ezra and Dutch Kavanaugh, his deck boss of 16 years, a man shaped like a chest freezer, boarded the dawn flight to Denver with a document box as a carry-on. Ivy stayed with Judd's family. She asked one question at the door. "Are you going to get them back for the garage?" And Ezra kneeled down and told her the truth, because he always had. "No, sweetheart, I'm going to make the garage the nicest room they ever put you in." Aspen in November is a town wearing a costume, and the Copelands fit it perfectly. From a rented pickup across the street, Ezra watched them come out of the Larkspur Ridge Sales Gallery in a happy knot, Sterling silver-haired and gesturing at the mountain like he owned the weather, Maxine in fur, Percy carrying himself like a man whose stomach hurt, and Meredith, his wife, laughing, with her hand on Callan Rook's arm 1/2 second too long. Dutch made a sound like a gravel truck. Ezra just watched, the way he watched the sky. The dinner was set for 7 o'clock in a private dining room at the Silver Moth, the kind of restaurant that has no prices anywhere. Bancroft's people had taken the whole room. Getting to a billionaire in 12 hours is impossible unless you understand rich men, and Ezra understood exactly one thing about this rich man, from a profile 8 years old. Odell Bancroft answered his own diligence email, a habit from the truck years, because he trusted his own eyes and nobody else's. At 2 in the afternoon, Ezra sent that address a message with no adjectives in it. 9 attachments, wire confirmations, the Alpengold registry showing it plugged into Larkspur's cap table, and 1 photograph of a child's cot between recycling bins, with the note in Maxine Copeland's handwriting laid on top, legible. The subject line read, "The equity in tomorrow's deal is stolen. I can be at your dinner in 10 minutes with the originals. I am the fisherman it was stolen from." At 6:40, his phone rang. A voice like a flatbed downshifting said, "Mr. Rafferty." "Odell Bancroft. I looked at your attachments for an hour, and I find I've lost my appetite for the fish course. It's a shame to waste the table, though." He paused. "They tell me you captain your own boat. I drove my own truck. Come at 8, order the steak." And so at 8 o'clock exactly, as Sterling Copeland rose, glass in hand, to toast 100 years of Copeland integrity, the doors of the private room opened, and Ezra Rafferty walked into the warm light in his dress flannel and sea boots, carrying a green folder, and the blood left Meredith's face so fast that her spray tan hovered over her skin like a ghost. What happened in the next 20 minutes became Aspen legend, retold by 2 waiters and a sommelier who refused every offer to keep quiet. Bancroft stood, shook Ezra's hand, and said, "Folks, small change to the agenda. My friend the captain brought some reading material. Ezra didn't raise his voice. He dealt documents around that table like a man dealing cards, one in front of each Copeland. For Sterling, the Alpengold wires, and a question: did you know the bridge equity in your family lodge was embezzled from a fishing fleet, or did you just not ask? For Percy, the transfer authorizations with his initials on the routing memos. For Rook, the 4 years of messages, printed, the casting call message on top. Crab money, lonely. Meredith could land him in a season. And for Meredith, nothing. He sat down, in front of his wife. Only the photograph of the cot in the garage, and Maxine's note, in a plastic evidence sleeve. She's not our blood. She's baggage. Deal with her. Then he spoke to the only person in the room who mattered. Mr. Bancroft. My daughter is 9. On Wednesday night, she slept in that garage in the cold because this family flew to Aspen to sell you a name they know is rotten, using my money, which they were planning to launder into your purchase price by Monday afternoon. You're not buying a lodge. You're buying the getaway car. Silence has a weight, and that room held about 11 tons of it. Bancroft picked up the note, read all 11 words, and looked at Maxine Copeland for a long moment. My mother cleaned houses, he said, for people who wrote like this. Then he stood, buttoned his coat, and told the room, deal's dead. Diligence fees are on you. Captain, the steak here really is exceptional, but I find I'd rather eat somewhere I can hear the highway. And he walked out with $400 million, and the Copeland family sat there in the wreckage of their toast, and Sterling Copeland, who had not paid full price for anything in 40 years, finally understood that the bill had arrived. The collapse took 9 days, and it moved with the mechanical mercy of a crab pot coming up. Monday morning, the bridge lenders on Larkspur Ridge, who had been promised Bancroft's wire, called their notes instead. The same hour, Petra's Friday freeze order surfaced, and every account Alpengold touched went to ice, including, to the Copeland's genuine horror, the personal accounts the stolen money had brushed through on its way, because commingling, Petra said, is how the greedy handcuff themselves. Meredith flew home Monday night with a lawyer's smile and a story about misunderstandings, and walked into a house where the locks, the original, honest metal locks, had been changed, and a process server was drinking coffee on the porch. Divorce, emergency custody, and a civil fraud suit, served in one envelope. Tuesday, the wire fraud referral landed with the FBI's Seattle field office, gift-wrapped, indexed, and cross-referenced, exactly as Petra had promised. And Wednesday, Callan Rook, seeing the tide, did what men like Rook always do. He called the U.S. attorney before anyone called him, traded immunity he mostly didn't get, and handed over everything, including the recording Ezra hadn't known existed, of a family planning session in Sterling's study in which Maxine Copeland's recorded voice said the words, "Cancel the sitter. A rough weekend will make the neglect story easier to file in January." They had left Ivy in the cold on purpose, to manufacture evidence against him. The custody plan was to blame the garage on Ezra's absence. When Petra played that recording in a Pierce County courtroom, the judge, a grandmother of 6, asked for it to be played twice, and the second time was not for legal reasons. Ezra got full custody in 11 minutes. Meredith and Percy were indicted on federal wire fraud. Sterling on conspiracy. Maxine, whom the lawyers couldn't quite reach on the money, discovered that Aspen has its own justice system. The charity boards dropped her in a single week, and the note, the 11 words, ran in a Denver business daily under a photograph of the Larkspur Ridge foreclosure sign. They took the pleas in the spring, because the paper trail Petra and the accountant built left nothing to argue with. Meredith Copeland, 51 months, federal. Percy, 38. Sterling, 28 months and a lifetime officer and director bar, which for a man whose whole self was a letterhead amounted to a second sentence. Rook was disbarred and testified with the enthusiasm of the recently converted, and Roscoe Meade, the old orchard man, sat in the gallery every single day with his hat on his knee. The restitution order returned the $1.9 million to Rafferty and Sons with interest, and the civil judgment took the rest. And this is the part Ezra did not plan but will not apologize for. The bankruptcy trustee, unwinding Larkspur Ridge, sold its 400 acres of entitled land at auction, and the winning bidder was a freight billionaire from Texas, who then called a fisherman in Corliss Bay. Bancroft didn't build a lodge. He built a wilderness camp, the Meade Camp, for kids who'd had a hard year, and he asked Ezra to sit on its little board, and he put Roscoe's name on the gate, And if you think grown men didn't cry at that dedication, you have never seen an orchard man get his name back. Meredith wrote Ezra one letter from prison. He read it once, standing at the kitchen counter. It used the word love 4 times and the word Ivy 0 times, which told him he had read enough letters for one lifetime. He didn't write back. Some storms you answer. Some you just let blow past the harbor. A year later, Thanksgiving came back around, the way it does. The table was set in Ezra and Ivy's kitchen, and it was crowded, which was the whole point. Judd and his family. Petra Osgood, who turned out to be a pie savant. Dutch Kavanaugh, who ate like the boat was leaving. Roscoe Mead, up from Colorado, telling Ivy stories about peaches. And Odell Bancroft, who flew in coach because he said private jets had recently lost their charm. Ivy was 10 now. She still slept with her door open, and she was still in therapy on Thursdays, because some cold takes longer than one winter to leave the bones. But she laughed all the way through dinner, and when it came her turn to say what she was thankful for, she looked around the table and said, "I'm thankful that this year we're all the same blood." And nobody corrected her, because she was exactly right, in the only way that counts. Later, drying dishes, she asked her father, "Did we win, Dad?" And Ezra Rafferty, captain, looked out at the harbor lights and gave his daughter the last word of this story. "We didn't win, sweetheart. We just got the boat home. That's what winning is." So, that's the story, and here's what I keep chewing on. Everybody in that family thought the dangerous Rafferty was the one with the boat and the shoulders. The dangerous Rafferty was 9 years old and paying attention. A little girl noticed her own name in a stranger's font, and instead of crying about it, she put the evidence in her backpack. Half of every con is counting on nobody reading the paperwork. The other half is counting on the mark blowing up when he finds out, doing something loud and stupid that lawyers can feed on for years. Ezra beat them because he refused both jobs. He read everything, and then he got quiet. Notice the order of operations, because it's the real lesson tonight. Freeze the money first. Kill the liar's payday second. Call the law third, with the file already built. Rage is a flare. It burns bright for a minute and blinds you. Patience is a lighthouse. And one more thing about that note. 11 words, written by a woman who thought class was stationary and blood was a bank account. She's not our blood. In the end, that note did more damage to the people who wrote it than any punch Ezra could have thrown, because cruelty in writing is a confession with a signature. Family isn't blood. Family is who shows up, who checks the garage, who comes home early. If this one got to you, share it with somebody who shows up for you. Subscribe if you want more stories where patience wins, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of each other.